You're listening to The Bird Bath, presented by The Fountain Report. I'm your host, Ryan Leach. Welcome back to The Bird Bath. Thank you for joining us for a very special Friday episode. I had the wonderful opportunity just last week at the AVMA conference to sit down with two incredible leaders from the AVMA. We sat down and spent some time talking to Dr. Rena Carlson, who's the immediate past president, as well as Dr. Paula Parker, who's the chief of professional relationships and strategic initiatives. These two wonderful ladies took the time out of their day right before the conference was kicking off, or actually on the first day that the conference was kicking off, to dive a little bit more into what's going on around the workforce shortage, as well as telehealth. And we heard a few little nuggets as well from Dr. Carlson on advice for the upcoming president. So unfortunately, the one bad thing that happened was that when doing a live episode like this, we get the joys of having technical issues. So the audio is not at the level that I want to bring to you guys on a normal basis, but I thought the conversation was too important to not make sure that it got out there. So I apologize for a little bit of the difficulty hearing, especially Dr. Parker's fantastic insights, but I'll be certain to make sure that the floor is open to sit down again and talk deeper about these topics. So thank you to everyone for listening. Enjoy this special episode, and we jump right into the first question. So let's get into it. Last year at this time, when the conference was ended, Dr. Lori Teller, who was the previous president, said AVMA data does not support the projected companion animal veterinary shortage that has been reported. Instead, between 2022 and 2030, the number of veterinarians providing services for companion animals will grow by more than 20%, from about 80,000 to more than 98,000. So the data that was sort of cited there, and a lot of the topics that I've read about, are looking at the colleges as being the source of finding the new veterinarians, which they are. And I'm just interested in what data the AVMA is looking at to feel confident that the colleges are going to be able to provide those. I know we've had some difficulty. One of the universities had difficulty with the NAVLE scores. Another is having, or a few are having difficulty finding professors to actually educate in those courses. How does the AVMA look at those difficulties that might be coming into actually the production of DVMs?
So first of all, we really appreciate being here. We appreciate your outreach and the time you're taking to talk to us. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
But I want to bring it back to a little higher level, to be honest. I feel like there's a ton of focus on shortage, the word shortage. And I think that's an important thing to talk about. And some of the things that Dr. Teller reported last year are still accurate and relevant. But I like to bring it back to a higher level and really look at our workforce challenges, because it's so nuanced. There are many, many aspects, and the shortages or numbers of veterinarian, that's really just one little part of it. And I think the pandemic brought that out, so clearly for us. So if you look back at the pandemic, before the pandemic, and I was a practice owner back in 2008, so I've seen these trends, and we were pretty robust. We had a good market, good demand for not only veterinary services. We had, veterinarians coming out of schools, and then the pandemic hit. So what happened? We had a lot of people pulling out of the workforce. They had to for personal reasons, whether they had to take care of family or their own selves. We had to go into a curbside mode and work in small teams. So we became pretty inefficient. And then we had this huge demand of veterinary services for many reasons. And there's a lot of economics behind that probably Paula will be able to tell you a lot more. But that was really a perfect storm that made it very chaotic. So as we're pulling out of that, I think it's really important to understand that as the dust is settling, we're looking at the distribution of veterinarians, where the true shortages are. And when you look at that companion animal number, we know that 80% of graduates go into companion animal, and they may flock to certain parts of the country. So as things are settling, we really are seeing much closer to pre-pandemic numbers. So I just want people to really look back and look at that bigger picture, and numbers are important, but we really I don't want to focus on any given number as much as what is the projection. Now, I'm going to let Paula talk a lot more about the demand and how those numbers really, come about. But I wanted that perspective.
Yeah. And Paul, I'm going to jump to you on that. One thing that I think was somewhat interesting, because I do think the AVMA is doing a fantastic work on trying to find a solution to incentivize veterinarians to be in more rural areas, which, as you look at access to care maps and you look at all of those things, there are huge gaps in places where people aren't able to do it. When I was previously looking at acquiring practices, I would talk to doctors and they say, yeah, we have people coming from 2-3 hours away. And that was just the lifestyle that people were happy to do. So the thing that I think is interesting, though, as we look at that, when we look at numbers, right? Numbers are difficult to say because each one incremental number is a human. Maybe they have a family. Maybe they have a desire to be in a certain place. And the distribution of those numbers is really the difficulty, I think, in a lot of spots. But it's difficult to square it to say, all right, we know the numbers exist, but perhaps the lifetime of historic trends and even the suburbanization of the United States, during the Industrial Revolution and all of those sort of things show us that people are more likely, especially younger people, are more likely to live in urban and suburban areas, which in turn will continue to give us that difficulty. So I think that's, I'm agreeing with you, but also have a difficult time. As when I was coming right out of school, I live in Dallas. I wouldn't have moved 2 hours outside the city, even for the right incentives, just for what was needed. So, Dr. Parker, I know you've very intimately familiar with all of the figures and everything as well, right?
I think if we zoom out and we look at what's our supply pipeline that we look at, so we think about what are the graduates coming out of US veterinary colleges, and then our ECFEG and PAVE certificates. They're an important pipeline, important part of our profession. And then also, how do those of us who are already in the profession, how do we behave? How do we supply? And so we do look at total numbers of veterinarians, think about what people's choices are about practice types. And we know there's shortages in particular areas, so rural, like you've mentioned, there's some of those individual pockets within the profession. And when we look at those, you mentioned incentives, and there's that thing, but you show me the incentives and I'll show you that. Think about retention, think about what's the value proposition. So still a non-financial. Then we think about what's people's experience in the work. And there's some amazing things about being in rural practice. Both of us have lived in rural areas. We both currently live in rural areas. Pillar of the community piece, which provides you that incredible experience. And our teams have been working really hard on thinking about what are those incentives to help people with rural practice. And there's a lot there where we work with the veterinary loan. To all of the students and veterinarians listening, I just give absolute props. Really, really think about rural practice.
I can agree with you. I think that's spectacular, and you get to have that Dr. Quinn medicine woman moment, right? You get to be out there, you get to be like the one that's helping things, and I know a lot of veterinarians find that to be massively rewarding. The difficulty that I'm having trying to sort of piece some of these pieces together and to understand it in the best way possible is we can incentivize DVMs to go to the rural practice, right? But we still look at taking a real life example. There's Pet IQ, which had 260 practices, and they closed 149 of them for lack of DVM staffing. That was their direct quote of why they closed those practices. Those were all urban and suburban locations. So there is a tangible difficulty for people in areas that we can even say people want to live, right? There's been a mass influx of, I'll use Dallas because my wife's a realtor, and please everyone keep moving to Dallas. I love having you come, bring your California dollars, but we're seeing a massive influx of people continuing to move to those places because we can incentivize the DVM, but we might not be able to incentivize their spouse or their partner to be as excited to be there. And we are seeing practices unable to have full hours. We're seeing a lot of the de novo clinics that are opening with temporary hours or shorter hours or single doctor locations. And people are looking to hire DVMs even in these areas, and they are having to either close practices or work on an understaffed or underpositioned place. Let's say we solve the problem and every rural location gets a DVM that needs it. How are we still taking into account the visible or reported need for those DVMs and practices that are saying, hey, we've been looking to hire someone for 3 years, or hey, we just closed 149 practices because we couldn't staff DVMs there.
So, one of the first things is it's really nice to put a simple, we closed because of this, right? And we
Right.
really know that is very complex. And so there's probably many, many factors involved that we may not know about. So once again, I worry about making long-term decisions on one data point, right? To be able to say, oh, we're going to make these big decisions for the profession based on one data point rather than taking in all of the factors that come into play. And just anecdotally, I want to share a little story. It was a light bulb moment yesterday for me, actually. We were in what's called our district caucus, and it's a governance committee within AVMA. So it's geographic, right? I've got veterinarians from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, right? So a year ago.
AKA rural.
Right?
Yeah.
But there's still...
There are pockets.
Pockets, where there are cities, and a lot of these people are from them. So last year at this time, everyone was saying, I need a veterinarian, I need a veterinarian. This time, I would say, as we went around the room and talked, over half of the people sitting there said, I just hired a veterinarian. One place hired two, one place. So I feel like as we look at the number of veterinarians, we are graduating more. We are seeing the change, right? I mean, things are coming back to normal. Are we there yet? No, right? I mean, we've got a lot to go.
Okay.
So I feel like as we're, making those long-term decisions based on a crisis moment, right? And so that's where I think AVMA, in my perspective, is really look at all of the nuances, all of the causes and reasons, and be mindful of the decisions we make. So I was really pleased to hear I've hired a veterinarian, so across the room. That was a stark difference from last year.
There's that piece. I've been in that situation when you're a managing veterinarian, or I was a managing veterinarian, not an owner. But that when you're in that situation where it's like, I either have to work or close. And that's an enormous mental load on that person when you're in. The piece that we're really looking at is when we look at demand on an industry-wide. So we'll always have these pockets of challenges and shortages. Look at an industry-wide scale and we think, okay, what are the big factors that are pushing demand? And if we take, for example, companion animals, because those factors are going to be different when you're talking about equine medicine or food animal production or companion animal. But if you take companion animals as an example, we look at numbers of pets and pet-owning households. I think for a period of time, we felt like there was a pandemic pet boom, or that certainly there was this feeling around it. As we've got further down the track and the data has settled, people have realized, this really wasn't a boom. It was just we had a shift in pattern. Okay? But we definitely saw that surge in demand during the pandemic. And two things really that spun on was disposable income. Government put $5 trillion into the economy, really peaked disposable income. And that we saw that people didn't have as many places to put that disposable income. They're less at home than. And so we saw spending on veterinary services. There's some of the things that we track on those long-term pet numbers, pet owning house. I want to look at inflation too. Overall economy and in the veterinary sector, because that impacts people's purchasing power and then what services are aligned to those dollars. And then when we look at some leading indicators, let's say, for example, visit numbers and per visit rate, and we've seen those things trend down. So when we look at those big figures, the further we get past the pandemic, the more that we understand. But we're still looking at growth kind of overall compared to a baseline, but we're seeing those tailwinds. So when we look forward and we think about what does demand look like in the future, how do we be realistic about what that looks like going forward? And to what extent are people going to continue to the part we're tracking mostly? Have to really think about that inflation piece, particularly when we look at the difference between a $100 invoice and $500. That's not 4 additional veterinarians. But putting all of those data points together when we look forward into the still optimistic about the future, but I think the further we get away from the pandemic is thinking about what was that as a unique point in time. The other piece we know is that we've got big pipeline of supply. So of our existing colleges, we've had colleges grow their number of seats at a rate higher than what their historical growth rates are. Some of these colleges have taken a big step in class size, so they have added, 50. And then we've got 13 proposed new veterinary colleges in the pipeline. And then we've had Arizona, Long Island, a lot of supply that we're expecting to come. when we talk about numbers in economic terms. But I think the piece, as you said before, that we always come back to is they represent new colleagues, new people in the profession that need support, and we want to support them so they're veterinarians for life. They can get as much joy and success from their profession as we've been.
To be mindful of time, because I think if I could keep you here all day, we could skip the whole conference. I could probably
talk all day about this. This is
fascinating. I really could. And that's why I do the podcast, because there's not a lot of people, that just want to go to a coffee shop and spend all day talking with me about this. So thank you on that. What I want to transition, though, is make sure that I give some opportunity to discuss telehealth. I think we definitely need to do this again next year and see what the numbers look like as we're continuing to progress outside the pandemic. When we're looking at telehealth, we're seeing, by the time this episode comes out, we will probably have not seen Rick DeSantis sign a veto for Florida. That's happening tomorrow. He's more than likely not going to sign that. So Florida is going to be the newest state allowing full telehealth and a virtual VCPR. When I look at the data and the history and the outputs from the AVMA around telemedicine, there's one survey that I think a lot of people are familiar with that pointed to, and the primary outcome of it was, quote, this is, pet owners prefer seeing their veterinarian in person. The difficulty that I'm having with the survey is that the raw data of that survey wasn't published. And so there's questions around what were the people asked, right? If I asked you, would you rather cook your own dinner or have a private chef? I'd like to have a private chef, right? But if we're asking, hey, you can either starve or cook your own dinner, you're going to be very happy to cook your own dinner. So I wonder that perhaps in that survey, we did not truly encompass the current state of affairs for people. Whether it's a gap in availability of care in rural areas or the difficulty of getting an appointment in a reasonable time. How do you guys look at that? How do you, you've obviously seen all the nuts and bolts of the survey. Can you give me something to be able to grab onto and through that?
Well, I think the important part is we really did ask preferences of over 1,000 or around 1,000 pet owners, right? These are people that were asked questions. How do you want?
And sorry to interrupt you, but where was the sample size from? I saw the demographics of the sample size, but how were they found?
So I would have to refer to, the experts in our sampling for that. That's not my area.
Okay.
But really, again, the preferences, what do you want as a pet owner? And really, and as a veterinarian, I've seen personally how important that connection with people is. You've got to build that trust so that then we see better outcomes with owners. So that's just part of the data. But the other part of the data is we really are seeing much fewer wait times. We're seeing people be able to get in on a much more timely basis than we did, again, through those outlier times of the pandemic. Emergency visits usually with less than 2 hours, so not the 6 and 8, 10 hours that we saw back during the pandemic. And people can get in within a day or two usually with the needs that they have. So we're just seeing, some data show that things are returning. We're happy to see we are delivering the care better than we possibly did during the pandemic.
Would you say that obviously telehealth is probably too big of an umbrella to ask one question about? Would you feel comfortable with the growth of teletriage and teleconsultancy as a way to improve the client experience and being able to allow people to know when and where they can and should receive care?
So I find it interesting that this conversation, is sort of even not even happening. I shouldn't say that, but we started talking about teletriage and tele-advice when I first came on the AVMA board back in 2000. So that is nothing new, and we are really excited to be able to have those technologies augment our ability to deliver care. The really important key piece of that is that in-person VCPR, and that's where I think the important grounding factor is. So again, we've been talking about telehealth and encouraging teletriage, teleadvice for a long time. So that none of that is really new. And again, our goal is simply to provide the best care, get the diagnosis as quick as we possibly can, provide the right treatment at the right time, and protect animal health, and of course, provide good service to the public.
Certainly at AVMA, particularly with our econ division, that's core business. You're absolutely right. those questions of phrase are so key to the information. And one of the ironies is one of the things that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years is we had a survey question that was, if you could, would you like to work less? And that's one of the questions. I'm not sure who says no to that.
Right.
I love my job. But if someone asked me, would you like to work less? I would say, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But am I going to? No. And so that's one of the ironies that we face. And we're really careful about how those questions are phrased. And then what's good governance around survey methodology and transparency. With the results of our survey that looked at technology, we made sure that the questions were on the bottom of the slide. They're in really small font. So I've reached a stage where I need my glasses to read them.
Okay. Thank you both so much. I think this was spectacular, and we have to do this again next year, because I think one of the things that I'm taking away from it is that the things are still transitioning. People are still coming out of the pandemic. People are still coming out of these things. Dr. Carlson, you have done a wonderful job of representing the AVMA, and I think you've been very poised in a lot of difficult questions that hopefully not just myself, but a lot of people have brought to you. What would be the one piece of advice that you would like to give to the next president and any other future presidents of the AVMA?
So I think one of the things that has always kept me going is that where's my North Star? And my North Star is absolutely, I want to support this profession the best that I can. It's given me so much. How can I, pay that forward? My advice would be to try the best you can to enjoy every minute and really connect with people. That's been the most rewarding part of this job, is the people and the dedication, the commitment, the expertise. I've just been able to meet so many amazing people. I can't even tell you how incredible this journey has been. So I'm excited to see our next president come along, Dr. Sandra Fay. She's going to do a fabulous job. So we're just excited to keep going and definitely want to keep this conversation going.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us for a special episode. And again, to the AVMA and for everyone that helped put this together, I really appreciate it.